back to the Louisville and Lexington ADU conference. We're here with Florentine Christian, who is the founder and CEO of Sidekick Homes out of Los Angeles, California. It is very early for her over there on the West Coast, so we appreciate her being here. This session is going to be, really how do you market and sell properties with ADUs? So a realtor with extensive experience in ADUs will discuss multiple facets of the ADU design and permitting process, as well as provide insight on evaluating, listing, and selling properties with existing ADUs or those with ADU potential. So Florentine combines her professional leadership experience in the fields of real estate, construction, and property management in her endeavor to tackle California's housing crisis one sidekick at a time. As a certified ADU specialist, Florentine returns to her building roots, where she began working with the family construction business at the age of just 14. By the time she graduated high school, she had experience in all aspects of residential home building, from foundations to final finishes. So her firm, Sidekick Homes, does it all when you want to talk about ADUs, and Florentine really is a rock star and has a comprehensive grasp on all the facets from concept to construction to marketing, and we're very lucky to have her with us today. So with that, Florentine, the floor is yours, and we look forward to your presentation.
Awesome. Thank you, Chris. And I just have to tell you, I'm thrilled to be here. It has been awesome working with Chris from both Louisville and Lexington. I know that it's been a big undertaking to put this event on, but it's been years in the making. I know you guys have been working really hard, and your entire planning staff has worked really, really hard in getting to this point and making ADUs really accessible to the constituents in your community. And so I just have to say bravo to that, because I know it's quite a process just to get to where you are today. And so I'm lucky I just get to show up today and get to kind of bask in all of the accomplishments that you guys have achieved up until now. It is my pleasure to be here. As Chris had mentioned, I've got kind of a wide array of backgrounds. So if you guys have whatever aspects of ADU from A to Z, any questions you have, I'm happy to answer them, but we are going to focus on real estate today. And so prior to founding my company, Sidekick Homes, where we're actually getting ADUs designed and built, prior to that, I was working in real estate, and I was previously a team leader at a Keller Williams Market Center. We had 200 real estate agents that I was responsible for coaching and developing. And so I know that we probably have a lot of realtors on this session as well. And so a lot of what we're going to be talking about is going to be geared towards the professional realtor and some of the things that you're probably going to want to know as a professional so you can really serve your homeowner clients. If you're a homeowner on this call, you're going to get fantastic value. And if you're a designer, builder, city planner, I hope that you're going to get great value as well. I really intended this to be for all audiences and for everyone to get good value. So I'm going to go ahead and just start sharing my screen here. Are you guys all able to see a slide that says be an ADU pro for your clients?
Yes, thank you, Florentine.
Awesome. Thank you, Sam. All right. So just a little bit about me. Chris had introduced me in saying that I grew up in construction, and this picture on the left is my high school senior photo. So, everyone gets their senior photo taken, and construction was so much a part of my life that my senior photo was actually, I wanted to take a senior photo with my construction gear on. So very happy to be actually returning to my roots in a capacity where we're providing much needed housing that we're starting to see is needed across the country right now. All right, so what are we going to cover in our session? We don't have a lot of time, but I want to, really pack in the value. So we're going to talk about why ADUs, what's going on that is making ADUs such a thing right now. For those of you who were on the call yesterday, we had a session with the White House. So after we wrapped up with Abdur, who was talking about appraisals, we went right into talking with the Federal Housing Finance Agency at the White House. Fannie Mae was there, Freddie Mac, Very well-rounded conversation. So why are we all of a sudden getting national attention on ADUs? We're going to be talking about that. What are the things that you need to know as a professional in terms of local resources, local guidelines that you should be aware of? And then what's the big deal for you? For you as a realtor, what's in it for you? And we're going to talk about 4 ways that ADUs can help you grow your GCI, your gross commission income. Then we're going to talk about, so you're wanting to grow that gross commission income. What are the things that you really need to become a pro at to support your buyers in their quest to buy a property that has great ADU potential? And then how do you support your sellers who are listing a property either that has an ADU or that has great ADU potential? And then we're also going to talk a little bit about unpermitted units, because I'm sure there are some of those. We just, on our last session, we had somebody in the Q&A who had, it sounds like what they're using as an accessory dwelling unit, but maybe it isn't permitted that way. So we're going to talk a little bit about unpermitted units. What is the process to get those permitted? And what are some of the risks of keeping them unpermitted? Now that the rules have changed, it's a great opportune time to get those unpermitted units permitted. All right, so let's just start with the why ADUs? Why now? What's going on in our real estate market that is making ADUs such a big topic that local municipalities, such as those in the state of Kentucky, are wanting to, change some of their local zoning to make way and make it easier to get these additional units built on people's backyards. Well, let's look a little bit historically. So if we look historically at what's happened in our household sizes, we'll see that our household sizes have decreased pretty substantially. If you look in 1940, we were probably about 3.7 people per house, and now we're down closer to about 2.5. So that's a pretty substantial drop in terms of household size. Meanwhile, our footprint has been growing. So our residential footprint per capita has really been increasing. In 1950, we were taking up about 292 square feet per person. And then, latest measure in 2013, we're taking up over 1,000 square feet per person. And so what we're finding is that over time, the size of homes has increased while the number of people who are living in them has actually decreased. So what that has done, and you're going to be listening a little bit later in the keynote speaker who's going to be following me, and he's going to take a much deeper dive and speak much more intelligently about this than I will. But the bottom line is we're really missing this middle housing for single people, for couples, for the elderly, for students. There's just not enough housing, the smaller housing for the few people, when people aren't necessarily a big family and need a lot of space, they maybe need a smaller space, and there isn't as much of that. So that's really where the opportunity comes in for accessory dwelling units. In addition to that, if we look at housing start trends over the last 60 years, we see something really interesting has been happening since we had the big real estate market crash in 2008. You'll notice our housing starts pretty much plummeted, right? They plummeted to far lower than they had been, far lower than the lowest lows over the last 50 years prior. And it was only probably by like 2013, 2014, that we just got to a point where we were starting to get up to where we were producing housing on an annual basis to keep pace with the lowest housing development years in the last 50 years. It's only very recently that we're starting to get to a point where the amount of housing that we're building is getting to where it's approaching roughly an average of where we've been over the last 60 years now. So what this has meant is that over the last decade, we've been running into a housing deficit because we have not been producing enough housing to keep pace with what we're, the average, right, of what we're traditionally needing to build to house the people in our country. So we've got this housing deficit. In real estate, you guys are seeing this, it's been driving housing prices up, right? And it seems like there's kind of no end in sight to that. And so we need to catch up on the building of homes. Meanwhile, there's seemingly less and less land. I know in Lexington, for example, you guys have your urban service boundary. So, you're really trying to keep a lot of the development within a certain geographic area. There's so much land there, right? And so we're having to think about, well, where are we going to build if there's not just wide open empty lots? Where's the development happening? And there's a lot of land in people's backyards. And so that's what's really prompting this trend that we're seeing with ADUs. All right, so what do you need to know as a professional? The first thing that I always recommend that professionals understand is, what the local guidelines are, right? There's things that we need to know, for example, related to permitted use. How can these accessory dwelling units be used? So in both Louisville and Lexington, owner occupancy is a requirement. So what that means is that you have to either live in your main house or in the accessory dwelling unit if you want to build one, right? So if you've got a rental property that you don't live in, that's not going to be a candidate for an accessory dwelling unit at this time. Maybe it'll change in the future, but right now we're focused on owner occupants. In terms of occupancy, Lexington actually has a maximum occupancy limit for their accessory dwelling unit. So it's a maximum of 2 adults plus, I guess, an infinite number of children that can live in the accessory dwelling unit. So it's not intended for 3 or 4 adults to all live in together. In terms of short-term rentals, such as Airbnb, not permitted in Louisville. This is strictly for creating additional housing units. In Lexington, you might be able to do an Airbnb, but you're going to need to get a conditional use. And so that's an additional discretionary process that you will need to go through to get an approval for your specific property if you would like to do Airbnb. Again, what's happened is that your local city planning community has worked very hard to try to loosen some of the normal zoning requirements to create much needed housing. And that's why a lot of cities you're going to notice are going to place restrictions on, being able to rent out via something like Airbnb. All right, where can we find our ADU resources? So you want to be able to look up your local guidelines for what you can build on your properties. And both cities have got great websites with all kinds of resources for you to really be able to dig in, understand the guidelines, and then also, there are cheat sheets, there are, go-to guides and things that have made it really, really easy. These are a couple of the resources that you'll find on Lexington's page. There's a great cheat sheet that just walks you through the basics of the ADU ordinance. If anyone's ever read a zoning ordinance, it's a little bit tedious. You feel like you need a law degree to read it. So it's great that, got a great little cheat sheet here, some visual examples of what an ADU can look like, and then some really great physical attributes that really demonstrate things such as, that the ADU has to be behind the main house. It can't be in the front yard, right? Some size restrictions, if it's an attached ADU, where can you place the stairwell, right? The stairwell can't be facing the front of the road. It needs to be either on the side or behind. So there's some great development standards you're going to find with some of these tools. Similarly, there's an accessory dwelling units guide. It's a 73-page guide that is full of information, pictures, sample floor plans, very, very well put together guide. It's one of the best that I've seen, actually. You know, and I work in about 20 different cities here in Los Angeles County, and you know, this is one of the best handbooks I've seen. So I think, man, if you're in Lexington and you're interested in accessory dwelling units, you definitely want to get your hands on this ADU guide for sure. There's a page that I've put together through our Sidekick Homes page that we offer to real estate professionals. And you can, you know, feel free to find us here. I think Sam was going to put a link in the chat. If anyone wants to access these resources and become a part of our community where we can keep you updated with essential ADU information, please feel free. As soon as we get our hands on the video from the White House talk, I'm going to be sending that out to everyone as well to keep everyone up to speed. There were some great developments that happened yesterday. So what are some of the resources? And we're going to be going through some of the details of these. So, you know, whether or not you jump into these resources, we're going to be covering a lot of this information here momentarily. But resources that you're going to need to know as a real estate professional: listing a property with an ADU, with a potential ADU, with an unpermitted unit, what to look for in a property with good potential, appraisal lending considerations. And then there's a booklet that AARP put out called the ABCs of ADUs. Any upcoming events that you may want to attend. There is a class I'm going to be teaching. It's going to be Pacific time, but it is an ADU webinar on getting started with your ADU. So if you're really looking at nuts and bolts for how to build an ADU, beginning to end, what pitfalls to avoid, etc., you know, we do upcoming events that you're welcome to attend. But we also have some guidelines by state, and we added a link to Kentucky. So we want to make sure that you guys are really set up with all the resources available to you. And so on the Kentucky page, we've put every single link we could find to your local city planning, your local city's ADU page, your local city's ordinance. There's some great GIS maps that are available through your city planning department. So we pulled all the resources that we could find as well, put those together. And then we created little cheat sheets for you as well for both Louisville and Kentucky and Lexington. So this is just what the guidelines look like. I just wanted to walk you guys through. I think it's important to understand what are some of the core guidelines for your cities. So for example, for Lexington, there's a size limit, right? So the size limit would be, and I've got to say, city planners, jump in and tell me if I'm misstating anything, because you guys know this inside and out and backwards and frontwards. But the maximum size for an ADU in Lexington is 800 square feet. That's, you know, unless you're converting a basement, in which case it may be as large as the existing basement. The maximum height is going to be based on, if it's an attached ADU, you'll follow the same development standards for the primary dwelling. If it's a detached ADU, it cannot exceed the height of the primary dwelling. In terms of your setbacks from the property lines, they're going to be the same development standards for the primary dwelling if it's attached. If it's detached, it's exempt. Now, why would it be exempt from setbacks? Well, because in Lexington, the only type of detached ADU you can do is by converting an already existing accessory structure. So that would be like a detached garage, for example. So you can't just build a new detached ADU at this point in time in Lexington. So that's why you see that the setbacks are exempt. Same thing with some of the other development parameters, your floor area ratio, lot coverage. The development standards are going to be the same as the primary. If it's attached, detached, you're just building within the existing structure. For parking, there's no additional parking required. That's an amazing feature in your guys' ordinance. There is, however, if you're in an area with maximum parking requirement, you may have one additional space for the ADU that can be permitted. We talked about owner occupancy and the fact that detached units can only be made from conversions. And that has to be a conversion that was already, you already had a building permit on file for that as of October 31st, 2021. And so the reason for that obviously is they don't want people to go build a new detached structure to then convert it to an ADU, because that's a little bit thwarting the intention of how the ordinance is currently written. All right, the detached conversion ADUs are also exempt from several development standards. So that's something interesting to look into in a little bit more detail if you're thinking about converting a detached structure. And no alterations can be made that would make the structure less conforming. Okay, so there may be some allowances if it's already non-conforming, but we can't make changes that would make it less conforming. All right, and fortunately, you get to have a pre-application conference with the planners prior to submitting an application for a permit. And you know what? I think that's a great feature. And before you get your plans too far underway, you get to start getting some feedback from the planners and make sure that you can actually build the thing that you are thinking you want to build. And you know, I always recommend that to people before you spend thousands upon thousands of dollars, you know, on getting all your structural plans and everything put together. Why don't you just make sure that you can build the thing that you want to build in the location that you want to build it? That's a great place to start. Then we also have, again, you know, all of the great resources for the city. So that's just an overview of Lexington. There is more detail. So I do recommend, again, you know, to go to the city's links and look at their guidelines if you're wanting to build in Lexington. So now for Louisville, we've got similar maximum size for an ADU. 800 square feet is the maximum size, or 30% of the primary dwelling unit size, whichever is greater. Now, you all have some nice big old houses out there, and I took the chance, if you go to the Louisville ADU page, there's actually a link you can click on to see all of the ADUs that have been permitted to date. And, you know, a great many of them are more than 800 square feet. And that's just due to the large primary dwelling unit size. So, I mean, there was, I think there was an ADU in there that was over 2,000 square feet. I mean, pretty sizable home. Here in California, we're doing a lot of 400 and 600 square foot units. And, you know, I was really thrilled to be able to see some larger actual home size units that were possible. So that's really exciting. Maximum height. For an attached ADU, it cannot exceed the height of the primary dwelling. And for a detached ADU, it cannot exceed the limit for accessory structures. And of course, it can never be taller than the existing primary dwelling. So, so that's all fantastic. Now in Louisville, you can build a new detached ADU. So that's a little bit of a difference from what Lexington has going on. However, you must meet the off-street parking requirements that the city has. So there's not an allowance for that. Whatever the off-street parking is for your zoning, you will need to meet that. No short-term rentals are going to be allowed, and HOAs may restrict ADUs. And so your HOAs, so probably in the newer built areas of town is where you're more likely to have those HOA communities. And that's, you know, they can restrict ADUs. So, you know, that would be something important, especially as a realtor trying to help a client find a property that may be amenable to building an ADU. It would be important to find out if there is an HOA for that community. Probably targeting some of the older communities in town might be a really safe bet for ensuring there's not going to be any HOA restrictions. All right, so that was just a quick overview of what you can build. And before I move forward, I just have to ask our city planners who are on the call, do you feel like I covered it? Is there anything you guys would like to add, or did I misstate anything in going through that?
Florentine, at least from the Lexington side, I think you got everything covered very well. So we appreciate you taking the time to walk through those ordinances. And of course, anybody on the call who's interested in the specifics can reach out to us specifically, either through the chat and the Q&A, or just give us a call. We can answer those questions specific to you whenever you have them.
Awesome. Yeah, because beyond what I presented, I'm probably not the one to answer detailed questions beyond that. But I know you guys have, I'm very impressed with the resources that you have on your website. I think you've done a really good job of, providing information for people to be able to access to really guide them through the process. All right, so let's talk about the 4 ways that ADUs can actually help you grow your gross commission income as a realtor. So first of all, we want to look at increased property values, right? So obviously, if you add an accessory dwelling unit to a property, it's a win for the client because they're going to eventually, when they sell their property, they're going to be able to sell it for a higher value. And then also for you as the realtor, if you're selling properties for a higher value, that also means you're probably going to be earning a higher commission when you do sell that property. So that becomes a win-win for both you and your client. All right. The second way that you can increase your gross commission income and help your client get greater value for their ADU is by demonstrating that a property has good potential to build an ADU. So now that this is a new thing in your city, you're really able to jump in and educate people that, hey, your property, you've got a large size accessory structure that could be converted into an ADU, or you're on a great corner lot with extra space where maybe you could build an attached ADU onto your house. So really thinking about selling a property with the potential ADU potential. If there's any designers who are getting into the space, you might offer to do a quick little site plan for a realtor who's listing a property and just draw out where that ADU could potentially be placed to start giving people ideas about what they might be able to do on that property. This is actually an ADU. This was a garage conversion that my company had done. It had a really, really cute architectural style. All right. And then also increasing your client's future purchasing power. Now, this is just thinking a little bit more about what do ADUs do for families and what does this do? If you treat your clients like they're long-term clients, right? If your client is using that ADU for rental income, this is going to increase their income and thus their purchasing power for future real estate purchases, right? Now their debt to income ratio is going to be in a much healthier position when it's time for them to purchase their next property. And they may get there a bit quicker than currently. There was a lady that I talked to recently. The whole reason for her wanting to get her accessory dwelling unit was to have extra income so she could move into a better school district for her kids. That was her whole intention behind having the ADU and that extra income. She was strategizing on how she's going to get into a better school district. All right. Also, if the client is using the ADU to house an aging parent, that will also likely be saving them considerably on a monthly basis over the cost of potential senior living facilities, which we know are very costly. And during the pandemic, they were a bit of they became a bit catastrophic as, COVID was spreading and people were getting very sick and being hospitalized and, at very high levels. So, it was a really great time to want to pull your parents out of those senior facilities and, have them living a little bit closer to home. We've got one more though on how do you help increase your purchasing power. And that is if you have an adult child, let's say you have, your son or daughter is in college or has come back from college, they may be able to save up for the purchase of their first home faster if they're paying, if they're staying in an ADU versus paying market rent. Elsewhere, renting. So these are all ways that your clients can get ahead financially and be in a position to have that increase their purchasing power much quicker towards buying their next property. And then last, this is my favorite. And this is one of the things I love about ADUs and why I really jumped into the space is these provide such an opportunity for a lot of homeowners who would otherwise probably never be an owner of investment property. They may never have had the opportunity to buy additional income property. However, now that they get the little taste of having rental income, they typically are going to start strategizing for ways to expand their rental portfolio, and they're going to have the means to be able to do it. And I have seen this time and again, where as soon as a client gets their ADU built, they're already looking for the next property to build an ADU on. It becomes a little bit addictive once people see how easy it is. And we'll see what your market does out there. But I know in the markets that I'm in, these ADUs are paying for themselves in 5 to 8 years. They're just a phenomenal investment. And for you, being knowledgeable about ADUs, you will be the go-to advisor for your clients, because as this is something new and there's very few people with knowledge about ADUs, I know the cities are trying their hardest to get the word out, but you as realtors are really going to be the mouthpieces and the spokespersons for ADUs, and to be able to say that, you know, you've got ADU expertise and you can really help someone with locating a great property with ADU potential, that's really going to set you apart from a lot of other realtors in your market. All right, so let's talk about how you can be that ADU pro for your clients. We're going to talk now a little bit about how do you support your buyer. Now, you know, because your ordinances are fairly new, there probably are not going to be a lot of properties that already have an existing accessory dwelling unit. So you're probably going to be in a position, if you've got a buyer who's interested in having a second unit on a property, you're probably going to be more in a position of helping them locate a property that will be amenable to building an ADU. So let's talk about what some of the things are that you should be looking for. I do have a resource. So some of the resources I shared earlier, I told you that, you know, we've got resources available, professional resources, and we don't just throw them out on the webpage for anyone. We really like to preserve those for our professionals, for our realtors, usually realtors, sometimes it's designers and developers as well of ADUs, but it's usually realtors that are the first point of contact. So we have a place where you can go to opt in to access all of our realtor related resources. And there's a link here, and I think Sam was going to put that in the chat as well. It's our website, sidekick.homes, and then /ADU Pro. If you go there, you can just put in your information and you'll be given a link to this private ADU resource page. And that's where you're going to find that this is actually like a 3-page document for what do you look for in a property with good ADU potential. We also want to look for what should you look out for? What are some of the things you should avoid that are, you know, that could be costly as you're looking to potentially build an ADU. And then we also just want to talk about paying attention to the title report. When you're looking, especially looking at properties that have 2 units. We'll talk about that momentarily. So what are some things you should be looking for on a site that might make it a good candidate for an ADU? Well, these are just some suggestions. So for example, corner lots are great because the ADU could have its own separate frontage, right? So it could open onto a separate street, and the units could be fairly separate and private. You don't necessarily have to walk through, you know, a yard space of the front unit to get to the back unit. You can just walk straight, you know, from the street into the other unit. So corner lots are great for building accessory dwelling units. Also flat buildable lots. So if you can, you know, the flatter, you know, typically pretty flat lots are good. If the sewer line is in the street in front of the house, it's great. If the grading is slight, you know, if the property grades slightly downhill towards the front of the property. If the sewer line's in the front and the property grades downhill towards the back of the property, you know, you might have to be putting in a sump pump depending on how deep that sewer is, or just having to trench quite a bit deeper, which can add some extra costs. Is the property on public sewer or is it on septic? So, you know, if it's on septic, that could really limit where, I don't know how many properties that you guys have out there, if you're have any properties on septic, but I know there are some areas in LA County that are, and you know, you can't build over the leach field, for example. So there's a lot more work that's going to go into building an ADU on a property that is on septic. Then you also want to look at properties with alleys can also sometimes be good, just because there's another point of entry, especially for pulling a car, for vehicle access to the accessory dwelling unit through an alley. I don't know, do you guys have very many alley properties in your cities?
We have some, but not a ton. Louisville might have more than Lexington does.
Got you. Okay. All right, cool. So just it's one thing to consider. And then of course, if you don't have corner lot alleys, that's fine, but it's always good if you've got a nice wide driveway, just so that if you think about it, we're going to probably have to do some grading where there's going to be some soil removal, and then there's going to be debris removal, and there's also going to be delivery of enough materials to build a house. And somehow the trucks are going to have to get back to the site, or you're going to be walking everything in by hand. So if you don't have a nice wide driveway with good clearance where you can get those trucks back there, and you're having to bring all the materials in by hand, there's just going to be some extra labor costs that will be involved with that. Looking for a garage with a good, well-built, detached garage that might be able to be, or it's other type of accessory structure that might be able to be converted. But again, you want to make sure there's still good, adequate parking on the property. That can always be a good thing. Or finding a house that's easily dividable. If you were wanting to carve out some space with an existing house, or space to do an attached ADU, right? Are you envisioning how you're going to actually create this ADU? And then you also might want to look at rents. Where are the areas that are collecting nice rents? Because construction costs are probably going to be relatively similar. You're going to probably pay similar amount for an ADU in any part of town, but you're going to have a better return in areas where the rents are higher. And then you also want to just think about the layout of the space, and how are you going to lay out the yard space? You're going to have shared communal yard space. Do you want to create privacy so that each yard, is kind of on its own and has its own private space? A lot of that will probably be dependent on who's going to be living there, right? Is it, family members, multi-generational living, or is it going to be a rental property? Do you like sharing space with other people, or are you more of a private person? You don't like to, we have one of our clients out here has a garden in her backyard, and she likes to, walk around with very little clothing on. We have great weather out here in Southern California. And so she really did not want any windows looking into her yard space and wanted, quite a bit of privacy. So, these are all things that you really want to consider when you're considering the site for where you want to build your ADU. You guys aren't going to have to worry about being in a coastal zone. I should have taken that off the slide. You don't have to worry about coastal zone where you are. But what you may want to pay attention to is utility connections. So connecting to utilities is often, it's one of the bigger expenses to building an ADU, and it's often overlooked. And so, if we have any remodel contractors on the phone who aren't used to new build construction, this is going to be one of those big areas you're really going to want to look at, because this is, more costly than what people realize. So if you're helping a buyer look for a property that has good ADU potential, you want to be looking at that electrical panel. Is it a newer panel, or is it an older panel? Right? Is it a 200 amp panel, or is it an older 60 amp panel? Right? If it's a 60 amp, you're probably going to have to be upsizing that panel. Similarly with the water line, right? How old is the water main, and how big is it? Depending on the plumbing code, you might have to upsize the water line, and that can be a pretty expensive cost if you have to replace that water line to the city because it's not big enough. Are you going to have to do separate utility connections, right? And all that's going to be based on your local municipality and what the requirements are. And then you want to think about sewer. And I recommend having a plumber scope the sewer when you're in escrow on a property. Just to, number one, look at the condition of that sewer line. A lot of the cities that I work in actually want to, when you put in a new unit, if you're going to connect to the sewer main line on the property, they want a scope of that sewer line to see what condition it's in. because if it's in poor condition, now's the time to get it fixed. But that can add considerable cost to your project. So these are some good things, if you're looking to buy that property, pay the $200-300 to have a plumber put a camera down the sewer just so you can see the condition of it, and it could save you $20,000-30,000 worth of potential sewer repair if your sewer's in really bad condition. So those are some of the things that I think are really good to just start taking a look at. That normally when you're selling, helping a client buy a house, they may not be as urgent. You may not be looking at, oh yeah, it's an older electrical panel, but everything seems to work just fine. And, that can be a future expense to upgrade down the line. But if they're wanting to build an ADU, it's going to be a pretty soon cost. So you want to keep that in mind. All right. Some other things to look at, just understanding if there is an existing unit, how is it permitted, right? If there's an existing accessory structure, is it permitted? We've run into situations where someone wanted to convert a garage, but turns out the structure itself was never permitted, right? Well, how's your city going to treat that? Are they going to allow you to build something in a structure that was never permitted to begin with? I don't know. That's going to be their judgment call, but a lot of cities probably wouldn't, right? So, finding some of that out, looking at permit records can be really helpful. Looking at the grading, we talked a little bit about grading and what direction does the property, what direction is it graded? What is the soil like in that area? Is it really rocky soil that when you're having to trench in the utilities, you're going to have some challenges with digging in the soil? Are we going to have to cut through concrete in a driveway to get utilities back to where they need to go, right? Where are likely utility connections going to be? If we're having to do grading and moving soil around or removing soil, it can be costly to remove soil from a property site. And then, is the property in a natural hazard zone? So that probably all of that you can get on some type of a title report or some type of a report that you guys do when you're in the escrow process. And then again, the utilities, looking, do we think anything will need to be upgraded or upsized? All right. One other thing to start, you guys are going to have to start thinking about this now, is understanding the difference between an ADU and a duplex. And as you start moving forward, what you're going to start to notice as there are more ADUs is that some real estate agents are going to list a single family with an ADU as a duplex. And indeed, it's not a duplex, and it's not going to be seen as a duplex by the appraiser or the lender. So it's very important that you understand what's the difference between a single family house with an ADU and a duplex, and what's the difference in how those will be treated. So for example, ADU units are not included in the zoning density limits. So if you're in a R1 zone that allows you to have a single family residence, you can still add an ADU, right? Because it doesn't count towards the zoning density. Whereas with a duplex, those units do count towards the zoning density. In addition, there is more leniency in some of the zoning requirements that are allowing for ADUs. If what you're building is a duplex, you're going to have to meet all of the zoning requirements. So that's just something that's important to note. ADUs might not be permitted to be used for short-term rental. The duplex might be. It depends on, what the local jurisdiction rules are, and those seem to be changing a lot these days. So that's just something you'll have to keep in mind. Now, these are the big ones, the appraisal and the lending. So the appraisal value, if you have a single family with an ADU, the appraiser is not going to be pulling comps of duplexes. They're going to be pulling comps of single families with ADUs, and there probably are very few of those. So you're going to really have to be ready for that appraisal, because the appraiser probably won't be. And even here in Southern California, where, at this point, we're building more ADUs in LA County than anywhere else in the country right now. And still the appraisers do not know how to appraise ADUs out here. And if they're not properly equipped and educated, what a lot of times we'll see is, I've seen it probably 5 or 6 times where they've given a 0 value. Now we know the market definitely values properties with ADUs, but if they can't find a comp, they just give it a zero value because they couldn't find a comp, back 3 months and, within a quarter-mile radius or whatever it was. Now, what we know is there's a proper way to appraise an ADU. And I actually have a resource on the resource page. If you guys want to go to the resource page, that you can actually give to the appraiser. It helps you to prep for the appraisal, but you can actually also give it to the appraisal because it is based on a curriculum that was put together by someone for one of the local appraisal institutes here. And it really is how to value a property with an ADU. What is the correct way to do that? And most appraisers are going to need that. They're not well educated at this point in time. So if there's any appraisers on the call, check it out as well. And check out the class. Dennis Desai is the appraiser. He's a very senior appraiser here in the state of California. He put the curriculum together, and it's a fantastic curriculum. It would probably be good if there's any lenders on the call to encourage your AMC to have a qualified appraiser on your panel who's actually taken the curriculum. And then also your lending appraisal will typically not include ADU income. So they typically won't use a cost-based valuation unless there's a track record of renting out that ADU. So whereas with a duplex, they will utilize the income approach to value. So those are just some things to keep in mind. Now, I will just tell you guys a quick story. I got a call from a realtor. It's been a year ago or so now. She and her client, she had represented a client. They put in an offer on what she thought was a duplex. The units were being built out. They were new builds. She thought it was a duplex. It was listed as a duplex. And when they got the certificate of occupancy within a week of closing, they realized it was not a duplex. It was a single family residence with an ADU. And the lending requirements changed. They had to reorder the appraisal. They had to re-qualify for a different loan product that could qualify for this property. So as you have more ADUs in your market, you're going to have to really start paying attention because you're educated. You're going to be educated by, within the next 10 minutes before we end this session. But most realtors out there are not. So you're going to have to start paying attention to how is this property, what is it really? And a lot of times you can find that information on the title report. Taxes, insurance, and property management. Biggest things I want to say is, there likely will be a property tax increase on the property. Don't be afraid of that because probably the rental income or the rental savings, if a family member is living there, will far exceed the increase in taxes, but it's just something to consider. Also, once the ADU is completed, you need to make sure that it's added to the home insurance policy. A lot of times people miss that bit. And then also, if you or your client is a first-time landlord, might be good to hire a property management company or get educated on landlord-tenant law. All right, so how do we support our sellers in the process? We want to make sure that we're correctly listing the property in the MLS, that it is a single family with an ADU. It's not a duplex, right? So that's one of the first things. You guys may want to work with your local multiple listing services and see if you can, actually have a category that you can click that's, specific to single family with an ADU. It took some time to get some of our local MLSs out here to do that, but it was really, really helpful when they did, because it really helped sort properties. It also helps appraisals because the appraisers are using the MLS typically to do the appraisal. So it helps over time for appraisers to be able to locate these properties with ADUs on them. All right. Also, how to price a property with an ADU. You're going to have to find some comps, and you might have to look further outside of your neighborhood. You might have to go further back in time to find these comps. So it's going to be a little tricky for you guys as your market is just getting started. But these are all things that you can find. Again, I have these handouts that are great guides. They're on the website on the sidekick.homes. If you go to the ADU Pro and you opt in, you can access all of these resources so that way when you have the listing, you can access it right then. You've got your kind of checklist of things to pay attention to. All right. We talked a little bit about marketing a property with ADU potential, which makes sense all day long, because it really will, people will pay a little more for a perceived value, right? If it's happening out here in Southern California, people are paying now that ADUs have kind of caught wind and people are starting to make a little bit of money off of them. They're looking for those properties that are like just prime for an ADU, because they know that if they buy a property that's prime for an ADU, they might be saving tens of thousands of dollars of unnecessary costs on a property that's not as good of a candidate, right? So they might be willing to pay a little bit more for that property. And then, of course, making sure that you're able to support that appraisal for your listing. You're going to need to do the legwork for the appraisal and have some homework ready to go for that appraiser to make sure that that property appraises. So there is a whole chunk of information here that's speaks specifically to appraisals and lending, gives you some pro tips here, how to prepare for the appraisal. And again, there's some information specifically that points to the Appraisal Institute. So this isn't just, Sidekick Homes put this out, but this is referencing an actual course by the Appraisal Institute, which is very well respected. So this is a great resource for you to follow, but also to hand to the appraiser when they're appraising the property. All right, we're going to just talk briefly about unpermitted units, because now's an opportune time to get those permitted. And why is it an opportune time? Well, one of the big reasons it's an opportune time is because there are risks associated with renting out an unpermitted unit. For example, let's say you had an unpermitted unit and it had an unpermitted kitchen and there was a fire, right? The unit caught fire. Do you think that your home insurance is going to probably cover a kitchen that was in an unpermitted space? Probably not, right? If it's connected to the main house and the whole, and both units go up in flames, you probably are going to have a total loss, right? So there can be pretty big risk, depending on, certain landlord tenant laws. It may not be legal to rent out a unit that's not permitted. And thus, if I've seen situations where a homeowner or a renter will move into a unit, rent for a couple months, stop paying rent, turn the landlord into the building department. So now the building department gets involved and they start getting fees and told they have to take the unit back to its original use as a garage or a rec room or whatever, hobby room or whatever it was previously. Now they have to do an eviction. And it's different for every city, but sometimes you have to pay to do a no-fault eviction just to move the person out. It takes several months where you're not collecting rent. And then they could potentially sue you for back rent for all the rent that they paid for Lord knows how long while you were renting a unit that wasn't legal to be rented. So there's a lot of risk with renting out an illegal unit. Highly recommend, if you know anyone that has them, now's a great time to get that converted potentially to an accessory dwelling unit if it meets the requirements. Let's go back really quick. Okay, so what are the steps to getting a unit permitted? So definitely talk to your city planners, because they might have an improvised way that you're able to do this, but most cities that I've worked with, you typically have to treat the unit as if it wasn't already, like, let's say there was a garage that's been turned into a unit. You would have to go through the same process as if you were converting a garage, right? So that means that you would have to get your plans drawn up, submit it to the city, get the plans approved, and then typically a building inspector would come out and start telling you what you need to take apart. They're going to want to see behind walls. They're going to want to see the plumbing and the electrical and insulation, the footings of your foundation. And they're going to tell you what they want to see to bring it up to speed. What I can tell you is usually more expensive than what people are anticipating. It's usually in the tens of thousands. Here in Southern California, it's usually about 50 to 100,000. Don't know what your construction costs are there, but it can be more expensive than people think. But again, in the long run, I always tell people it's upfront cost that wasn't paid for when the unit was built out. So you're just, you're paying it now on the back end, right? Like there was some cost savings, you're paying on the back end, but now when you go to sell it, you have that increased value because you actually have permitted space and you have a desirable space that you can list, and that the appraiser should, if you have a good qualified appraiser, should take into account. All right. So, cost, time frame is going to really depend on how much work needs to be done. But there's a lot of things. We actually have a checklist. I'm going to put it on the resource page. I don't think it's on the resource page right now, but I'll put it on the resource page. I have a great resource on permitting an unpermitted unit. And what are the typical things you're going to run into? You're going to typically run into things like the windows aren't adequate for egress, or maybe the bathroom, like you don't have enough space around the toilet, right? So that needs to be changed. You might not have proper footings in the foundation. The insulation might not be adequate. The plumbing, electrical might not be up to building code. So those are some of the common things that we oftentimes will see. All right. So finally, what is the process? This is basically, in a nutshell, you assemble your team, do some form of feasibility, which means make sure you can build what you think you can. That might be that pre-planning appointment. Get your financing secured, get your schematic drawings worked out, construction drawings, submit to the city. Then you get to pull your permits and go into construction. I know the last lender talked something about a 90-day getting these things built, but during COVID, I can just tell you, I don't care what market you're in, with the supply chain issues we've been having, not going to happen in 90 days. Give your builders probably at least a good 3 months to get it done. So that's what I have in terms of my presentation. Again, feel free to access all the resources. I'm going to take some questions. We've got about three minutes for questions. But again, any of the resources that we talked about, you guys have access to them as ADU pros, and I appreciate you taking the time to get yourself educated. You guys are obviously the tops of the tops in your industry. Chris, what questions do we have?
Well, Florentine, that was certainly a content-packed time, and a little bit of something for everyone, for realtors to builders to lenders, appraisers. You got it all covered. So we appreciate that. Like you said, we have a very short time for questions. So we had quite a few questions coming in, but I guess the question that I have is, as someone who is in a market where you said you're building more ADUs than anyone else in the country right now over in Los Angeles, and as a sort of a fledgling ADU start, like this is the beginning of our ADUs, what can we learn as a community here in Kentucky? How can we learn from some of the things that you've seen of the evolution of ADUs over the time that you've been doing them?
Yeah, I think education, you guys are already doing a great job of education. We're pressing a little bit on the lending side, and we're already starting to see some evolution with the White House talk that happened yesterday. One big thing you guys can do, though, Chris, is really support the development of your skilled labor. Getting people licensed to be plumbers and electricians, HVAC mechanics, tile layers, because that's really where we've been seeing is we just have a real big skilled labor shortage. So yeah, we want to create more housing, but who's going to build it? Right. And we're not even, I don't feel like that's on anyone's radar out here. I don't think our local government out here is doing a great job of it, but you guys could probably get ahead of the curve and, just really help support your trade schools and get people, encourage people to get into the trades. It's great jobs, great industry to be in.
Well, excellent. And Florentine, if I could ask you real quick to stop the share of your screen. As you said, we've got a lot of links that Sam has put in the chat for us, including a lot of links that point back to Florentine's company's resources, and there's a ton of resources there. I would encourage everybody, we didn't have a ton of time to get to everybody's questions, but luckily, as you pointed out, there's lots of resources available. So I'd encourage you all to go to those links and check those out and make sure that you can find some answers to your questions there. And then, as you all have specific questions for Lexington and Louisville, I could speak for us, and I believe I could speak for Louisville planners as well. We're here to help and answer the questions that you all have. So Florentine, thank you so much. As again, I said, it's early out there. We appreciate you joining us here in Kentucky and giving us the value of your expertise and all the work that you've done. So thank you so much for joining us. Also want to remind everybody too that, we've got one more session and you all don't want to miss that one either. We've got our keynote speaker Daniel Parolic, who's going to be diving into his missing middle housing concept and the role that ADUs play within that concept. And Florentine, one more time, thank you so much We appreciate it, and we'll see everybody back here at 11 o'clock.